screen with my notes. I can do that. Let's get that going. But then does that work? That works. That's how it works. Because now I'm a little worried. Let me see. Okay, I see 3 now. I'm just not sure if it's showing up in a different spot for y'all or not. Am I done? Okay, well. Okay, so I got my book last week and I'm playing catch up. Take your time. Be sure to send me a DM with your email address so that I get you added to the free cohort. Because after the test will reflect the 9th edition. As you're reading, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to send an email or ask during the live sessions. We're live every Monday and Wednesday from 4:45 to 5:45 CST. All right, like I said, make sure you get me your email address so I get you added to the live cohort, because once these guys finish, I'm going to make this private only to the folks that were in the free class. Okay. All right, let's get started. Chrisette and Letitia, I'm waiting for chapters. Oh, my fear. Oh no. Okay, it's giving me an error that's saying that the connection is unstable. I could potentially try to do it from my phone. Hey, Lay. If that happens again, let me know and I'll stream from another. Hello, my love. I'm also live over on TikTok too, but the only problem is you won't be able to see notes from there. Okay. Keep me posted. But yeah, I'm looking for chapter information and we're going to go ahead and get started. So let me know where you are with the reading. Okay, so we are going over chapter 13 and 14 today. I'm going to be flipping back and forth between these screens to catch your guys' comments. I'm not on StreamYard today, so I reached the end of my subscription with StreamYard, and I got to go ahead and get that all reset up. Should I start it over from reading from chapter 1? I can't wait until you start over to follow along. So for the old classes, make sure you click the link in the bio, go to the YouTube, and click on the live section or the Hillman Talk playlist. And you'll be able to find chapters 1 through 12, okay? All of that is up on the live. Okay, 12 to 13. Okay, perfect. All right. And then, of course, my daily reminder to make sure you guys are studying those flashcards because vocabulary is going to take you very far in this exam. Okay, chapters 13 and 14. So chapter 13 is over point of use processing. So we've talked about this a little bit, but today we're going to take it a step farther from talking about not just cleaning and preparing instruments to be transported, but cleaning instruments and preparing them for sterilization at the point of use. Now, there are very few times that that's going to be happening. For the majority of the cases, instruments are going to be used at the point of use and then transported to the sterile processing department for reprocessing. But in some occasions, we do process and sterilize on location. All right, so learning objectives for chapter 13. By the end of this chapter, you guys should be able to explain the purpose and importance of point of use processing, Identify the responsibilities of the operating room and procedural staff in pre-cleaning instruments, because remember, with point of use cleaning is happening at the site where the procedure is being done. So that does not include you. You will not be in the operating room. You will not be in the procedure room. That will be a nurse. That will be a scrub tech. That will be a physician. That will be procedural staff. Okay. So we're going to talk about the differences between their responsibilities to this instrumentation and your responsibilities to this instrumentation. We're going to describe best practices for handling soiled instruments after use, recognize how point of use processing affects infection prevention and patient safety, discuss the challenges and common mistakes of point of use cleaning, because there are some very common ones, and it is going to be incumbent on you guys to keep an eye out for those things. And then we're going to talk about where we get the rules for point of use cleaning and immediate use sterilization from, which is going to come from that AMI and NC ST79 guide. As a sterile processing tech, besides your textbook, ST79 will be your Bible. You will not think, move, breathe before you consult AMI NC ST79 in your guidelines for sterilization practices. Okay, and then lastly, we should have an understanding of immediate use sterilization procedures and regulatory compliance. All right, Chris said, I still don't see them chapters. Drop it for me in the comments. Okay. So, point of use processing. The definition of point of use processing is it refers to the initial cleaning of surgical instruments at the site. So whether it's in the operating room, in the procedure room, in the emergency room, wherever it's the procedure's taking place away from the sterile processing department. And this is before the transport to your decontamination area, right? So when we've talked about point of use processing in the past, we've talked about where an instrument will be used and then it will be wiped down or cleaned off in the room or whatever that procedure room is, and then taken to a soil utility room and waiting for transport. Somebody will come to the soil utility room, pick it up, bring it to SPD. Sometimes that's SPD staff, sometimes that's transport staff, sometimes that's the point of use care staff that are finished with it, they wipe it down and they bring it to you. It's really going to depend on where it's coming from and what your department processes are. But with point of use processing, you're going to always have that, whether the instrument gets processed there or with you, point of use processing takes place as soon as the instrument is done being used. And remember, that's to ensure that we're not having any erosion and we're not keeping bioburden on the instrument and letting it dry and letting it be harder to get it off. So the purpose is it prevents blood and tissue from drying on the instruments. We want to reduce the microbial load, making decontamination more effective. So when I say we want to reduce the microbial load, we will, instead of me bringing it to you soaking wet with blood, we want to reduce that. I'm going to take that down. Is it clean? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But I've reduced how much bacteria is being transported from one location to the next. And then it helps maintain instrument function and longevity. Now, how does that work? Basically, it helps maintain instrument function and longevity by not damaging the instrument and not allowing for corrosion to take place in the first place. All right. I'm coming back to see these comments. Thank you, Aisha. I appreciate that. Kenya is on chapter 7. That's fine. Take your time. That's fine. Old classes are in the live section. Take your time and make sure that I have your email address so that you maintain access to the class when these guys are done. Okay. All right. So responsibilities in point of use cleaning. The OR and the procedure room staff have responsibilities. They have to remove gross soil and debris using sterile water or enzymatic solutions. There may be products that they purchase that they can open up a package and it has a sponge with enzymatic on it. Or it may be just as simple as them opening up a basin full of sterile water and taking a clean rag and wiping it down. It could get as fancy or as low budget as you like, but you must remove gross soil and debris using either one of those solutions. You may never use a solution that has saline in it. Keep instruments moist with damp towels or approved sprays. So they may spray those instruments down and then put them in a container for transport, or they may go ahead and wipe them down with water and then cover them with a damp towel. Same effect. The whole point is that it's not drying out while it's being transported, and it's not drying out while you're waiting for it to be transported. You're going to always use a leak-proof container and make sure it's properly labeled with that biohazard sticker on the outside. You guys have seen that quite a few times, and it's in your textbook. You may never transport any soiled surgical instrumentation without that symbol on the outside. Okay, responsibilities for the sterile processing department. When you provide the OR, you're going to be providing the OR with proper tools and supplies for point of use cleaning. So that might be you stocking them with foam sprays or you stocking them with sterile water. It could be different depending on your facility. Some surgical departments will order all this stuff themselves, and you guys won't have to be responsible for stocking any of it. It's really just going to be depend on your location, but make sure that it's there. Okay, that's for you and your safety to ensure that it is there. You want to ensure the staff understand the importance of immediate cleaning. So we've talked about this a few times, so I'm not going to belabor it. But when you get that instrumentation into your decontam room, it is not to just sit. It is to be cleaned, and it is to be cleaned immediately. The longer you allow it to sit there, the longer you're not only are you allowing it to dry, but you're allowing those biofilms to build up. And it's not that they can't be broken down; it's just more difficult. It's more labor on you. You're going to inspect the instruments upon arrival and follow decontamination procedures. All right, and that's really important. You want to inspect instruments upon arrival to your decontamination room, regardless of where they're coming from. Just like we talked about last week with loaner instrumentation, where you could potentially be borrowing instruments from a company or borrowing instruments from another facility, and they arrive to you and they're broken. You don't want to find that out after you've already cleaned them and sterilized them and brought them up to the OR. You're going to have a hard time convincing somebody that was broken before you received it. So it's really important for you to do that for your safety in your department, for your finances in your department, and also, of course, for the efficacy of your surgery, because you don't want to be dropping off instruments to the operating room that are not functional. Okay, so common mistakes in point of use cleaning are allowing blood and debris to dry, making cleaning difficult, allowing those biofilms to build up, making cleaning difficult. And another common mistake we can see at the point of use is using saline instead of sterile water, which leads to corrosion. When you're taking that salt mixture and you're putting it onto stainless steel or any type of titanium, it's going to cause rust, it's going to cause corrosion. The longer that it stays exposed to those products, the more corrosion we will have. And then lastly, another common mistake we see at point of use is stacking instruments without protection, causing damage. Now, how many folks saw the video that I posted on the TikTok last week when I announced that we will be having class today instead of last Wednesday? I put a video up of a case cart, and I showed that when I was opening the door to that case cart, there were surgical instruments that were starting to fall out onto the floor. Now, if you notice, that box that was on top was a white cord. That was an example of a camera system with a fiber optic cord. That is something that we would consider to be delicate in the sterile processing world, because the fiber optics are quite literally light cords that are wrapped around each other. They're very delicate. So me stacking instruments up on top of them, I could potentially break the fiber optics, making them useless. You will plug them up to a computer system and you won't be able to see a darn thing. Right? So if the OR staff are not aware of this, they're not taking this class like you are. And I promise you, they don't do too much, okay, to learn anything about this. They are relying on you to know this. So it's a lot of the times it's on us to have a conversation with them and let them know what is appropriate when it comes to stacking instruments. Because if they put heavy trays on top of that camera system, now we don't have one. And, and maybe I only had 10 to start with. They're very expensive to replace. Okay, so infection prevention and patient safety. When we're talking about point of use, infection prevention and patient safety is the name of the game. You are trying to reduce the microbial load. You are trying to keep the instruments moist. Also, you can get them clean and sterile in a timely fashion. You're preventing biofilm formation. So that biofilm is a protective layer of bacteria that forms on instruments if they're not cleaned properly. And the whole point of use is I just used it. So it can't be cleaned properly, right? It is dirty. Whether they wiped all the blood off of it or not, it is dirty. The longer I let it stay dirty, the more those cells are going to build up their own resistance and create lovely little colonies for their bacteria to grow in. Time is your enemy when it's time for decontamination. Regulatory compliance. The Association for the Advancement of Medical Instrumentation, or AMI, and the manufacturer instructions must be followed. Period. That is your motto. That is your mantra for the rest of your sterile processing life. The Association for Advancement of Medical Instrumentation and the manufacturer's instructions for use must be followed. You cannot invent anything. You cannot come up with a workaround if it does not follow the guidelines of AMI and that manufacturer's IFU. And trust me, in the 16 years that I did this, there are plenty of folks that have asked me if I could shortcut something. Plenty of surgeons that told me I was being ridiculous for following the instructions for use. Plenty of folks have been very pissed off with me. Okay. Because I told them I'm sorry. That's not included in the manufacturer's instructions for use, and we won't be able to do that. Okay, so that's your lifeline. That's what you're falling back on. And you're doing that because the manufacturer has already been put through a rigor with the FDA to test these instruments and figure out what the best ways are to use them, what the safest ways are to clean them. And then they're giving that information to you to use. It is not for you to reinvent. And then lastly, the impact on healthcare workers. Improper handling increases contamination risk not only for the patients, but for the staff. Right. So when you guys were looking at that video, I asked you, what is the main number one offense going on inside this video right now? And y'all called it out real quick. There was no PPE. You're in a soil room, in a decontamination room, and you don't have on gloves, you don't have on the gown, you don't have on a mask, you don't have on hair cover. You're touching things. So the contamination risk for me is high. And then the contamination risk for my patients just went up because I'm going to go from this room to clean rooms as I leave this decontamination area. So God forbid I don't alcohol foam out or I don't wash my hands on the way out. Now I'm taking whatever was on that case cart in the operating room and I'm spreading it all over the place. Between me going into the operating room to get back down to sterile processing, that is exponential risk for infection that doesn't have to be there if I'm following my protocols. Also, so AMI and NC ST79 guidelines. So we just talked about that AMI's guidelines are going to be your Bible. And this ST79 covers specifically steam sterilization and immediate use sterilization. So this book is a comprehensive standard that provides guidance for sterilization in healthcare facilities. It's one of those books that's comprised of nurses and sterile processing professionals, industry leaders that get together and they discuss best practices and they put these things forth for us to participate in. I do also want to say that as sterile processing techs, from the time you guys become technicians, you are absolutely eligible to put your feedback into AMI and NC standards. They're always looking for front end users to give information on how these things are affecting them on the front lines. Okay, so keep an eye out for those because you can absolutely participate and help correct anything you feel like would make the industry better. So what we do with this book is it outlines the best practices for decontamination, sterilization, storage, and reusable medical devices. And the numbers within the system just to let you know what section of the department is talking about. So ST79 is specifically for sterilization guidelines. So immediate use sterilization. This we have not talked about yet. We talked a little bit about steam sterilization, but immediate use sterilization takes place at the point of use. Typically, these are going to be smaller sterilizers that exist in your operating rooms. They may be functioned by your sterile processing department, or it may be nurses that take care of this. It just depends on your facility. As a manager, I always prefer that this falls under the sterilization techs, the guys that are certified to do this work, which may mean that you have to leave the SP department and go to the OR to perform these functions. But immediate use steam sterilization it was formerly known as flash sterilization up until 2009. It's a process of sterilizing unwrapped or improperly prepared instruments for immediate patient use. Now, what does this mean? We talked about last week what you guys have to do in order to prepare a pack of instruments to be in the sterilizer, right? We had to put those indicators inside. We had to wrap it in some type of resistant cloth, right? We watched that Kimberly Clark video, or we're packaging it into a metal container that locks and has its seals. And the whole purpose being that these products will expand when they're heated and allow the sterilant to enter and touch these instruments, and then close when they're being dried so that nothing is then going across these barriers until we open these instruments at the point of use. Sometimes we don't have time to wait for that full process to take place. A regular steam sterilization cycle might run you anywhere between 50 to 90 minutes just for the entire process to take place. Pulling a vacuum, pushing steam in, drying the instruments, it can take quite a while. If you're having a situation in the operating room where you cannot wait, your patient is bleeding out, or there's some other compromise and you just simply cannot wait, they've set up this practice of immediate use sterilization to be such that you will clean the instruments and you will process them the exact same way you do for regular sterilization. The only thing that's going to change is that you're not going to package the instruments at all. You're going to put them into either what we call flash packs, or there's some other products on the market. And those are going to go into a sterilizer, and then that sterilizer is going to complete just the sterilization process. No drying will take place. And this is intended to cut the sterilization process time short, get that instrument now back into the operating room as quickly as possible. Yes, Miss Cressette. Why you ask? Did it freeze again? Let me know. Okay. So there are a lot of guidelines on IUSS sterilization. Essentially, you should do this only in emergencies. This should not be a regular routine. This should not be in replacement for the fact that you don't have enough instrumentation, right? So we've talked about those times where maybe I'm doing 5 total needs in a day, but I only have enough kits for 3. So we're having to reprocess those instruments from case 1 to go back for case 4. I cannot make it a standard practice to flash those instruments or IUSS those instruments simply because I don't want to pay to have enough instruments to cover my case, or I don't want to put enough time in between the cases to allow for a proper sterilization process. It's a big no-no. It will get you fined. All right, so ST79 recommendations for IUSS. Instruments must be thoroughly cleaned and decontaminated before sterilization, right? So that process does not change and not sterilize anything that has not been decontaminated first. A sterilization cycle that meets time, temperature, and moisture requirements must be used. So we're still going to be reaching the same high temperature with that steam exposure. We still have to make sure that we're having that sterilization exposure time is the same. That does not change. We're only cutting off the drying time. Processed items should be immediately transported aseptically to the point of use. So these are instruments that are not packaged for sterile storage. They can't go sit on a shelf somewhere. They have to go straight into the operating room. That's why usually these machines are up in the operating room wherever it exists, and those technicians that are utilizing them must go from the sterile processing department to the operating room. It's also why sometimes your operating room departments will have the nurses take over that function simply because it's in their department. And make no mistake, they still must follow all the same guidelines for documentation, for point of use cleaning, and the like. They cannot skip any steps simply because it's not being performed by a CRCST. And then lastly, you have to have biological indicators and documentation. It should be used to validate the process. So just like your regular sterilization process will have your biological indicators, your process challenge device put into the sterilizer, you're going to do the same thing for this. Just because you're skipping the drying time doesn't mean anything about this process is changing. All right, so regulatory agencies and IUSS compliance. Like I said, there's a lot of people that have their hands on IUSS because if you're doing this for any other reason than emergency, somebody's going to slap your hand back. You have the Joint Commission, which requires facilities to track IUSS usage and ensure compliance with ST79. Every single time you sterilize anything, there's going to be a record of it. And especially with IUSS, you have to keep separate documentation every single time you run an IUSS load. What it was, why you had to do it, who it was for, what room it went to, and you have to have that patient information. Just in case anything goes wrong with that, I have to be able to track it back. Joint Commission will absolutely fine you if that information is not available or it's incomplete. Then you have Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So CMS enforces infection control standards, including sterilization practices, and they're going to do that through the Joint Commission. So if the Joint Commission comes in, you fill your Joint Commission survey, you best believe you are going to be losing some funding from your Medicare and Medicaid services. Occupational Safety and Health Administration, they have some guidelines to ensure staff safely we are handling instruments in a safe way between sterilization, because remember, you are doing this outside of your normal room. So they provide some guidelines on what should be provided for you. Same as if you were in a decontaminant room, they're going to make sure that you guys have PPE. They're going to make sure that you guys are not being exposed to bloodborne pathogens, and then you have safe protocols to get you from point A to point B. And then lastly, we have the Association for Perioperative Registered Nurses, or ARN. They provide guidance on sterile processing in surgical settings. So there's going to be, especially once you leave that sterile processing department, there's going to be some ARN guidelines that are going to govern you when you get up into the operating room. Consequences of noncompliance. So first and foremost, not doing your job in a way that is considered safe and effective is going to be increasing your risk of hospital-acquired infections, not only for yourself, but for your staff, for your coworkers, and for your patients. Possible fines and citations, and loss of accreditation if violations persist. So when the Joint Commission comes in, if they find that you have violations, 9 times out of 10, they have every expectation that you're going to correct that while on site. They want to see a plan today about what you're going to do to fix whatever it is that they saw that was out of standard. If it requires a more long-term approach, you're going to have to submit a plan on how you're going to correct those situations, and then you have to follow it. They will be back. They will check. If they find you out of compliance more than once, you put your accreditation at risk. And that means that your entire operating room may have to stop working on procedures, right? So you can imagine what that would be like for the hospital if the operating room loses its accreditation, right? You have teams of surgeons and SCTs, nurses, scrub techs, EVS, transporters, all without anything to do today. It would not be somewhere that I would not want to be there. I would not want to be there. It's very important to remember when it comes to your Joint Commission or any of your regulatory bodies, they're not there just to penalize you, just to make life hard for you. They're there to make sure that you're following these standards on a daily basis so that your patients are safe. All right, so let's talk really quickly about the procedure for performing IUSS. This is not going to be very different than the procedures that you're going to do in your regular SPD department. So one, we have to get that instrument clean.